Hello Mouseworks fans, and welcome back. For this episode I'm going to be building a small display diorama, and it is going to be a very quick build, something you can do just to display your armor or aircraft. And I'm going to do this in a small space with very little cleanup. So I know a lot of you who don't have the space to work on some of this stuff, and dioramas and the like can scare you because of all the mess, but I'll show you how you can do it on a desktop of about a 2 foot by 2 foot square and keep it clean and neat. And I'll show you some different materials to use, and so let's get going. Okay folks, the first thing you're going to need is a good wooden base, and for this I like to use pine. And the reason I use pine is basswood is very soft, not as soft as balsa wood, but the problem is if you wanted to stain it or paint it, basswood just keeps absorbing the paint and keeps absorbing the paint, and eventually will warp because there's so much wet material in it. Pine will work a lot better. So just make sure that it's good quality, that it is actually smooth on the bottom, and that these routers are fairly smooth. If they're not, they're usually a cross grain section that's pretty rough. Just sand that down and get that as smooth as you can. Not really important because that's going to be basically just the outline of the diorama, and it'll be actually not seen that much, so it's just going to be like a frame. So the first thing you're going to need is this stuff here. Now, a lot of people use Celluclay, a lot of people use the paper mache type stuff or plaster. A friend turned me on to this a long time ago. There's different brands of it, and what this is it's a patch, a concrete patch. The first brand I used was called Patchcrete. Anyways, what it is it's for concrete paved driveways that have been damaged, and it's for just filling in cracks and dings and stuff like that. It has the same texture as concrete, dries very quickly. The nice thing about it though is it's actually a plasticized material, so it will withstand different types of temperatures and heats and things like that. It's actually not concrete. It is very rubbery when it's finished, so just be aware of that. But that's also what makes it stick to the wood really well. You generally do not need to put any kind of a glue down when you put this down. I usually wet the board just a tiny bit just to get it to spread well and not tear up. I don't use very much water. I don't want this to warp. So you can also put varnish on this to keep it from warping if you're going to be doing this too wet, but I'll show you how to use this stuff where it will not warp the wood. The next thing that you're going to need is going to be some stones, and I've got a couple different types of rocks. I believe I got these at a train store in Colorado. That's now out of business, unfortunately. The company that makes these is called Arizona Rock. I believe they're still in business. They might do mail order and so forth, but you can just collect rocks around the house and around construction sites and so forth, and you can do that and you get free rocks and so forth. The problem is there's a lot of dirt that's mixed in, and there's different types of rocks. People just think, oh, rocks are rocks, but when you get into dioramas, depending on what you're making the diorama of, whether it's desert or whether it's Middle East or Europe or wherever, the rocks are quite different. Some are flat, some are round. So what I did was I collected a bunch of these bags of rocks, and I bought this at a place called the Container Store. And what I bought this for was, this is actually my little sample box, and what I did was I put the different types of rocks that I had bags of. There's some that are called Apache stone, things like that. You can see how some they're very different, and that's how they came out of the bag. But what I did is I made a sample of these in here, so now I can actually see what I want to pick. And then I put them in a jar and I labeled the jar. So like this is number 8, so 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8, so that's the one that's number 8. That way also I don't have to have these out all the time, because the box is heavy when you get 30 or 40 different packs of rocks. So this actually makes it nice. It's a desktop idea. You can kind of get an idea. You can mix it to see you know, what it's going to look like with the smaller rocks and so forth. So anyways, it's a little handy thing. I think that cost me $10 for that little case, and it's for makeup or something like that. But anyways, so that I chose those two sizes. Basically, this is the big size, this is the small size. And what I'm going to do on this particular diorama is I'm going to make a dirt road that's hard, pretty hard packed dirt road. It's going to be well used, so it's going to be packed down the middle with 2 ruts, and then there's going to be actually a center line of bigger rocks, and then on the sides there's going to also be bigger rocks. So let's get to drawing and planning out the actual diorama. Okay, so this is the actual vehicle that I'm going to be mounting to the base, and it is a Centauro from Trumpeter. Built this many years ago. Did a few fix-ups on it, but I wanted to actually put it on a base because I'm starting to put most of my stuff on bases. It makes it easy to handle, easy to display. Also, it makes it better at shows and contests. You don't have it sitting just on the table where people will grab it. You can actually use the base to move it around and take a look at it. So anyways, so what I want to do is I want to first have the size of the base. Now, some of the bases I have are just perfectly square, which looks good if your tank is very square. This one has some little extras on the ends, so just kind of depends what you're looking for. I do like to have a little hangover on either side, because I do like to make these dioramas represent what the camouflage is, or what the vehicle normally runs in. So if I had this with a lot of desert colors, I would do a desert type terrain. If it was more of a 3-tone European camouflage, I'd have more grasses and so forth on the bottom. So it's kind of just showing it in its environment. So a lot of artists always say don't make things straight on like dioramas and so forth. Well, on a regular diorama, yes, I would agree with that. But with a display diorama, you can actually do something straight and it looks like it's a carve out of what you're doing. I could make this road this way and make it slightly off center, which adds a little bit of interest, but sometimes with a base that's fancy like this, it kind of looks weird. So we're going to just do a straight section, like as if you're looking at the section of road. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first space out where I want it. I want it fairly centered, so maybe have it a little bit back, because I like to have a little bit more on the front than the back. And then I also want to have, it's going to be a dirt road, and it's going to have a little bit of grass on the side here. So we're just going to put a little mark kind of on the edge here, knowing that's where I'm going to have a little hedge of grass on the edge of the actual road. So with the planning out of the way, we are ready to actually start putting down some of the material. Now, one of the things you do have to do with a smooth road or a packed road is you have to make sure that your model's wheels are level, because it's going to show when you put it on a packed level surface. If you put this on the same material and it's real thick and it looks like mud, if your road wheels or your wheels are uneven, you can push it into the material while it's still wet, and it will actually seat the vehicle and look natural and cover up your mistake of having the wheels or tracks elevated. So this vehicle, you can see it's actually very straight, very steady. So we're going to be able to use it on the packed surface. Okay, so you're going to notice that I'm working on my desktop and I've got all kinds of stuff around here, and I'm not worried about making a mess. Also, I don't even need to tape this area off here unless I really want to, because the way I'm going to do this, we can cut the material off right at the edges. So what I'm going to need is I'm going to need a metal spatula like this. This is a painter's or artist's spatula. I like the metal ones because they flex, cannot be damaged, so if you put any material on this, you can scrape it off, and then you can even flex it and just break it off. So this has been used quite a bit, even though it looks brand new. So that's what I'm going to use to spread the material. So what we're going to do is we're going to grab some of the material. This is what it looks like in the package. Now this stuff will not dry out, even though it's got air in it. When you close it up, it will stay wet for years. I would suggest you buy fresh if you're really worried about it being too clumpy. As it starts to dry, it'll get more clumpy. So, but we can also smooth that out with water. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to place some of this stuff on here. Actually, first, what I'm going to do is take a paper towel with some water. Got a little bowl of water here next to me, and I'm just going to soften the wood a little bit with the water. Just not a whole lot of water, just enough to make it so this stuff grabs. So, and then I'm just going to start smoothing this stuff out. Now the nice thing about this stuff is you can get as you can make it as rocky as this if you want to, or as smooth as a concrete road. Just depends on how much water you actually apply to it. And you would be surprised that you don't need very much of this stuff unless you want to do it real thick, which you don't really have to do it really thick. So what I'm going to do is on these edges, you can see I'm actually cutting what I refer to as cutting the material to the edge. And you can see it just goes right to the edge with this spatula. Does not go over it. You don't even need to have a piece of tape. Now if it does for some reason go over, you can actually just take the edge of the spatula and scrape it off while it's still wet, or even when it's dry you can actually scrape it off or sand it off. So we're going to apply some of this stuff here, and that's about enough, believe it or not. So we'll try this bit here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to dip my spatula in a little bit of water, and you can see that really smooths things out. It depends on what type of material you're going for. So you could, again, you can make it really rough. You can actually take a brush and poke at it to try to get it to be even rougher, and then let it dry. This stuff is water soluble till it dries, then of course it's not water soluble. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the water and I'm going to continue to make this all in one piece. Okay, I've got the stuff all spread out, and I've cut all the edges, brought the material to the edge by using the knife itself and then just scraping off the excess. Now I'm going to smooth it out. Now I could just keep this as it is to be groundwork, but I do want it to be fairly smooth since it's to be a packed gravel road. So I'm just going to take a little water with the knife, and I'm just going to smooth it out, almost like troweling a real road. And I want it fairly, a little bit thick. I would say maybe about a 1/16 of an inch thick at the most. The edges can be pretty paper thin. The nice thing about this stuff is it's gray, so it's already primer gray color. Try not to let any of the wood show through though, because then that can be a problem when we go to paint this. So this has only taken me maybe about 4 minutes to get it to this point. I'll take some more water and smooth it out a little more. We're back, and I'm smoothing this out. Now I want to show you this tool. This is actually something new, believe it or not. That nobody had this before that I could see. Anyways, what it is a regular paintbrush handle, but it's got a rubber tip on it, so it's almost like a squeegee, but it's really soft. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as a squeegee instead of the actual metal scraper there, and I'm going to put it in a little bit of water, and then you can actually just super smooth, just as Bob Ross says, just air and 2 hairs or something like that. Just drag it along the top, and look how smooth it's starting to get. So it doesn't matter if it rips a little bit because we're dealing with ground. So, but it does have to be fairly packed for what we're doing. So we do want it somewhat smooth. So, okay. So now you can see how smooth this stuff really is. So what I'll do is I'll clean up the edges, and then we'll be ready for the next step. Let's take a look back here. Now I'm ready to put on some of the rocks. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the small material rock, and this you just need to be kind of careful. By the way, this stuff is fairly non-toxic, so feel free to use your fingers. Just make sure you wash off. If you want to use a glove, can make sure that it doesn't hurt anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this stuff, which is Like I said, it's got a little bit of actually dirt in it, plus all the rocks. But I'm just going to spread this over the whole area. And again, have something below it, but it doesn't make really much of a mess because you're dealing with something that you don't have to spray or brush. So what I'm going to do is then I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to smooth this out. So it's actually smooth enough that I can actually start to, or that dry enough I should say, that I can start putting some of this, embedding it into the actual patchcrete stuff. So what we'll do is we'll just continue with this. We'll get it all covered and then rub it in smooth. Okay, I've got my coverage here pretty good, and I've tamped it into the wet patchcrete. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start taking some of this off. I'm just going to barely rub the stuff off. Now you need to get kind of centered so you don't make too much of a mess. So what's going to happen, I'm going to start making the grooves or the ruts in the road for the vehicle. And I'm just going to push the excess off. Now you can see I'm exposing a little bit of the patchcrete, but a lot of the dirt coming off of the rocks is actually coloring it into kind of a gray brown color, which looks really good. And then I'm pushing the other stuff into the center and the other off to the side. So we're kind of making ridges. And the stuff is set up to the point where I can actually do this now without a problem, just lightly. And we're going to bring some of this into the center and some out to the edge. Now if it's a little wet, it will pull up on you, so just tamp it down a little bit more, let it dry for a little bit, and then continue on. So okay, so you can kind of see that we're actually making the ruts in the road and pushing it, having extra rocks pushed to the side, just like what the real vehicles would do to it. So I'll continue with that. Okay, so now you can see that we've got a rut going. We're going to accentuate the rut a little more with the stuff that's a little bit thicker, or bigger rocks I should say. So we're going to take some of that and we're going to actually put those down the middle, just so it looks like it threw some of the bigger rocks and material into the middle. Okay, so we'll continue with that and do both the edges and the center with the bigger rocks, just sparingly. Now at this point I also will take out some of these rocks that are too big with my tweezers, ones that look like they'd be tire breakers and axle breakers. Just pick them out and just grab them and set them off to the side. Don't want it looking too unrealistic. You know, if enough vehicles have driven on this, there shouldn't be any super huge rocks. So alright, now that we've got the basic outline of what we wanted, I'm going to test fit the vehicle. Make sure I wipe my hands clean of any debris before I do this. And I'm going to put the vehicle on there, and then I'm going to kind of wiggle it. Since the patchcrete is still a little wet, I can actually indent the wheels just a tiny bit, just to make sure that everything is, that the wheels are still sitting correctly and nothing is sitting too high. So, of course, if you have flattened resin wheels, that actually works better. But okay, so we are ready to go to the next step. Okay, so I made a little bit of mess, but it's contained. And the next step is going to be actually to start to attach this all in one piece and glue it down. Now you can say to yourself, wow, how are you going to glue down those big rocks? They're not going to, you know, without them looking like they're covered in glue. Well, there's some railroad guys show me some techniques over the years, and I've learned a few myself, and I will show you how to make this actually fully permanent. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to try to get ready to use this stuff here. This is Scenic Cement from Woodland Scenics, and this is what we're going to glue the stuff down with. But this dries completely matte, and you don't see it, and it's thin, but it has to go into the rocks. And unfortunately, when sometimes you drop the stuff on by itself, the small rocks will float to the surface of the liquid and they'll start to separate, and you get these weird bubble shaped bits of rock, and it can be a real pain in the neck. So we need something to actually make it so when I put that glue on, it absorbs fully and inside that material that's on the bottom. So what I'm going to use, you can use detergent, dishwashing detergent and water as a surface breaking agent, but this stuff I found, I thought I'd try this. This is super wet. This is awesome. Basically, you fill up this little piece here and you put a ton of water with it, so this stuff will last you a lifetime. And you're making what they call wet water. And so all this was with just 1/2 of an ounce of the material, the super wet. What this does, it's got glycol in it, so it actually will absorb much better. Most water and dishwashing detergent will make a spread of about 1 inch, and this stuff is pretty amazing. I'll show you exactly what it does. Let me grab a dish and we'll pour a little bit in here. You just have to be careful with this because it does still have some water retention, surface tension I should say, and some stuff can float away on you, so just be careful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little eyedropper, and I'm just going to take this, and I'm not going to drop it. You can spray it, some people say, but sometimes you blow away some of the material. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to the edges, and I'm going to hit it, and let me see if you can see this. Let's get a little tighter view here, show you what it actually will do. So I'm just going to touch it to the edge and then give it a squeeze, and you can see how far this stuff will actually go to wet all this surface. Now I'm doing this with the patchcrete still somewhat wet. I mean, it's almost completely dry, but it's pretty darn absorbent right now. So you can see how it's not moving any of the rocks. I'm being very careful, and it's going pretty quickly, and I want to make sure that everything gets wet and saturated. So I'll get the whole thing saturated, and then we can go to the next step. Okay, now you can see that I've got everything wet, and it actually stays wet for quite a while because of that glycol and some of the other ingredients. So I'm going to shake this stuff up. Make sure you shake the Woodland Scenic stuff up really, really, really well, because the glue at the bottom needs to become all suspended in the material. And now wherever I drop this stuff, it will follow the super wet. Again, I don't need hardly any of it, and this is really good stuff. It is a little bit different than actual matte medium. It's got a little bit more glue to it, so matte medium works as well, just it doesn't work as well on thick items. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around and do the same exact thing that I did with the wet water, but I'm going to do with this glue. And if you get a little bubble, it'll pop on its own. So now this is going to be kind of hard to see, so make sure you go from one end to the other and track where you're going. You'll see that little white material for a bit, and then it'll disappear pretty quickly. So to make sure that you get it everywhere you want, be methodical, don't be random, because then you'll lose your spot, and then you'll lose where you have it, and the stuff will just come right off. So I'm going to continue with that and glue it all down. Okay, I've got all the glue in place, and going to let that dry. I can use a hairdryer to dry it and speed it up, but I think I'll just go and get something to eat and let it dry on its own, and then we'll be ready to keep going with it. Alright, MouseWorks fans, I set this aside to dry and went to get something to eat. Came back, it was still kind of wet. So I let it dry overnight and gave it complete ability to dry. You see the color kind of change, it lightened back up again. And now everything on here, as you can see, is completely glued down. And if there's anything that's really loose, you can just either knock it off or put some more glue on it if you wanted to at this point. So we're ready to go to the next step. Now, at this point, it sort of looks like an aquarium with aquarium rocks. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a base coat of paint to bring this back to the brown kind of design. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this Deco Art. You don't need to use anything fancy or expensive. This thing's like $1.25. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to thin it out a lot with water. So let's shake it up first. And I did put a BB in there to get it to shake. And for this, you don't need very much paint to water ratio. You want it about looking like strong coffee. And now we're going to put a bunch of water in here. Ratio should be about 1 to maybe 1 to 10, 1 to 20. And if you want it a little bit more, you just use less. So you want it stronger, you just use less water and more paint. Okay, so the other thing I'm going to do is I've got 2 brushes here. One of them I'm going to have as a brush to put this stuff on as kind of a wash. The other one is going to be just for a water brush, so if I get it too thick somewhere, I can go in it with just water and spread it out so there's no dark spots. So we'll mix this up real good. And this stuff will absorb into the material. Like I said, darken it up a little bit. Mainly it'll go into the base of the gray color. It's still a little bit of gray here. So let's give this a little bit of a test here and see how. Yeah, it's looking about right. So again, we're just going to start at a corner and let it soak in. This you don't really have to worry about putting the material, the super wet material on there. But you do have to watch out because you're putting water back on the glue, so sometimes it'll loosen up the material. So don't brush on it, just dab it and let it soak in. You can use an eyedropper as well if you wanted to, but a brush works pretty good for getting it where you want. So as you can see, it's starting to darken that up quite a bit. And then of course when it dries, it'll dry a little bit lighter. But mainly what we're trying to do is get this center section here to be a little more earth color. So again, I'll take all that, and that should cover just about the whole thing. And we'll do that and be right back. Okay, I've got the wash on there now, which has darkened it up quite a bit, both the rocks and the patchcrete material. And it's, I mean, it's a little damp. It'll dry out a little bit longer overnight, get a little bit lighter. But the rocks are still in place, so didn't soften the glue too much. Like I said, if it does, just let it dry, and then they should reattach themselves. The glue should re-dry, or just apply some more glue. So now, next, what we're going to do is we're going to highlight this, and this makes way different appearance. It's going to really magically bring out all these details, all the details in here that you actually kind of see but don't see. They're going to pop right out with this color. But you got to do just a very light dry brush. So I'm using this light pebble color, and what it's going to really do is it's going to highlight everything, including the rocks, and it's going to blend it all into a kind of make it a little more the same color. Won't be so bright difference between the pebbles, which is kind of what gives it away a 1-to-1 scale. So, okay, again, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that that brush, that wide, cheap brush, dip in a little water, and I'm going to use a little water just to get it flowing on the brush. But then I'm going to use a towel to dry off the paint, or wipe off the paint, I should say. And what I use is these shop towels. You can get them at Walmart or automotive places. A friend turned me on to these. They work much better than paper towels because they absorb quite a bit more, as they're made for oil and things like that. So I'm going to use that to actually place the paint. So what I'll do is I'll get some paint on the brush here, and then I'll wipe it almost completely gone on the towel. And then just very lightly, I'm going to start picking out the tops of the rocks. And show you right in the middle where it's really going to start popping them and changing it, making it more homogeneous and just make it look a lot better. So you can kind of see it there, and let's see, we're right about here. So, and some more rocks will come off, so that's okay. But you want just enough to again make it a sand color. But you can see how much lighter it's making than these. And then even like the black stones and so forth, it'll blend them in to make them not so noticeable, not so 1-to-1 scale. This is actually going to scale it down. And some rocks will come loose, some ones that are too big anyways. So I'm going to keep doing that, and we'll show you what the results are. So now you can see some of the transformation. This is the side, this half has been highlighted with the sand color, and this has not been, so except for this corner here I started. Anyways, that is the difference. You can see how flat this looks, which doesn't look bad, but this really pops it out. Hard to see on the camera, but it actually looks much more realistic, like there's been a settling of dust on top of them, and the highlight for sun, and then the middle tones are the actual tones of the rocks, and then the bottom tones are that dark brown wash that I gave. So you can do this any type of color you want. You can do it darker colors to simulate mud, or really light colors to simulate Africa, North Africa. So I'll finish this up and show you some pictures. Alright, so we've got all the stonework done. Got the highlights on and the shadows. And you can also change the color of this with pigments. Just warn you that pigments will flatten it back out because they'll color all sides of the rocks. So, but if you just want to do the path, sometimes you can lighten that up a little bit. But before we do any of the vegetation, let's take a quick look at what this, test it with one of the vehicles and see how we're doing. So looking pretty good. We do need to position it just right, but looking pretty good. Now the other thing that we will do later is we're going to try to match the dust on the wheels to this, and so it'll actually meld this together. You can see how the vehicle is kind of separating itself from the groundwork. So the vehicle looked real, now this looked more real, then we're going to make the vehicle look real as the base. So ready to do some vegetation. Okay, we're ready to do some vegetation on this. Now I could put a whole bunch if I wanted to, but I'm trying to make this kind of a desert scene, so there's just going to be some sporadic vegetation down the middle and some on the sides. And for this I'm going to use my Mouseworks grasses. I've got summer grass and winter mud, which is pretty dark. So I think I'm going to use the summer grass, which is a mix of about 7 different types of material. And so it'll give you just basically a one pour fits all type thing. So we'll use that, and I will also use some of these press-on little bushes or sprouts of camel grass. And there's different ones. This one has some like flowers on it. This one is just the green, and then this is the tan. And I'm going to use these together so that they don't look too uniform. And these actually are adhesive, so you just stick these on, but we'll glue them down at the end just to make sure they fit real tight and don't come off. So we'll get started on that. Okay, so the way I do the grass is I don't like to put glue down first and then put the grass in the glue. Reason being is because I try to put the grass down, and if it's not what I like, I can vacuum it up or brush it off or brush it around and then glue it, so you have that option. You're not affixed. and we can do glue at the end, kind of like we did with the rock. So I'm going to take some of this summer grass, and I'm just going to put some down the middle just to see what it looks like, and we can break it up a little bit. And basically this would be where any of the water or liquid from vehicles would make this stuff sprout up. So we don't want a whole lot, just to indicate that there is a center line to that. And then I'm going to go and do the edges on either side, probably a little bit heavier. And I'm just taking pinches of this stuff. Like I said, there's 7 different materials in there. There's static grass, there's clump foliage, there's all kinds of stuff in here. So if it's not what you like I said, just brush it off and start over. And we'll make sure there's a clump here and there. But you don't want a whole lot, I mean, unless you're really trying to make something look forested, which can have its own set of troubles. Usually less is more with this stuff. Alright. And just trying to keep it off the center there. So just do it random, you know, if it's hard to do random and it looks too much of a pattern, move it around with a brush. Stuff's so light you can just blow it off if you wanted to. So okay, so we've got kind of a random little thing going here with all the tufts and the larger pieces and the smaller pieces, and I'm thinking that's going to be pretty good. So again, you can check your vehicle, putting it on there, seeing how it's looking. Okay, now time to put the actual tufts of camel grass on there, and I'm going to use the ones first that have the little flowers on them, because I'm going to use those more sparingly. You can see they're all very uniform in the package, and I don't want them to look uniform on the scene. So, but what's neat about these, like I said, they're adhesive, so you just take them with a pair of tweezers, pop them off, and then stick them down. If they don't stick very well, just leave them there, because we're going to glue everything on, and we'll make them stick with the glue. So now the taller grass I kind of want towards the outside, so it looks like that if it got too close to the roadway it would get trampled. So okay, and then if I wanted to use some of the tan grasses, grab a few of those out here. Okay, we're going to take, and usually the tan, it's best to kind of put them with some of the other grass, so it looks like it's just drying versions of the other grass. And these you can tear up as well. Some companies actually make the assortment have different sizes, but if they don't, you can always tear them up. That way they're not too uniform. So okay, and then I'll put some green tufts in there, and try to make it random, not too vegetative, like more desert. So all right, I will do that and show you the results. Okay, I've got the grasses pretty much where I want them, just sporadic to show a desert scheme, and I'm going to put them on again with the scenic cement from Woodland Scenics. Now there is a bit of a trick to this, so I don't have to use the wet water again all over again and have it kind of a pain in the neck, is I'm just going to use an eyedropper, and I'm going to apply this stuff on the side of the grasses, and it will actually wick in and go underneath the grasses, and it'll hold. So I'm going to just kind of put it in. You can see it start to go around, but you're kind of going from the ground up. That way when you put it on the top, nothing will float away. And this doesn't take long at all. You can see how it still flows pretty well. Some of that stuff is probably still in there, the super wet. Okay, so I'm going to just continue that all over just the vegetation, and if there's any stray rocks I want to reattach. Now while the vegetation is drying, the glue for it is drying, I'm going to go ahead and clean off the sides and prep that ready for the black paint. I did sprinkle a little bit on top of some of the places that got too much glue and the grass started to flatten out, kind of suck to the ground and kind of look too flat, so I put a little bit over the top, and then we'll just blow that off, the excess, and it'll make it a little more three-dimensional. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure there's not a lot of grasses or material on the sides of the base, and then we're going to paint it with, again, craft paint black. This stuff is dead flat black. It's really good stuff. Okay, I'm ready to take my lamp black. I'm going to use quite a bit of it. This stuff I'm almost going to paint on straight from the bottle, but I am going to use a little bit of water just to get it to flow a little better. And for this I'm going to use the big brush, dipped in a little bit of water here, and we'll just get it flowing. A little more water here, and then that way you can see it covers really well. This is lamp black color. And then when I get to the edges, using this squared off brush, if I can get it to flow right, it'll go right to the edge and it'll make you a straight edge. So you don't have to tape it off or anything, you just have to go along, and it's right at the edge of the wood, where the wood and the groundwork material come together. And if it gets a little on one or the other, it doesn't really hurt anything. You can try to scrape it off quickly if you got a lot on there. But if not, it's, you know, it's a natural scene, so a lot of the stuff is going to be irregular. It's not meant to be perfectly straight. So I'm going to go around the whole thing like that, and we're going to frame this thing in, and it's going to make a big difference on, it's going to highlight basically what you've done and get rid of all this wood color. Alrighty, and with that, that is the end of this tutorial. There is lots of other stuff you can do with a scene like this. I will do other videos in the future doing little puddles of water, mud, things like that. So, but I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it gives you some ideas of how easy and how simple this can be. This took me all of, besides the drawing time, probably less than an hour to do something like this. And get my little vehicle back on there. Okay. And we are ready to do some weathering on the tires. And that will be one other video which will use the actual pigments.